Welcome, Dr. Rizvi, and thank you very much for giving us your precious time. Uh, Please tell us a bit about the development of different Sufi orders in Bengal.
Mm. Yes, Sufi or Sufi orders in the mainstream Sufi traditions is described as emerging in the 12th or 13th century. So, particularly in the larger context of South Asia, Sufi orders began to arrive in India in the late 12th and early 13th century. So far as historically looking at this development, we can say that yes, of course, some Sufis they travel to Bengal from North India, but before that, as students have also explored South Asia's contact with the Islam or Islamic tradition. So they say that even before the Turkish advent to North India, so there were some Sufis who had already come to the eastern part of what nowadays we call as India. So there are different stages of Sufis' arrival in the Bengal context, but looking it from the specifically from the perspective of orders or Sufi silsilas. So one of the aspect that needs to be discussed here is that once Sufi orders in the North Indian context became very prominent, particularly the Chishtis and the Suhrawardis. So these were the two Sufi orders, organized Sufi order, or institutionalized Sufi orders, that disciples of the masters of these orders also were either sent by the masters or they themselves traveled to Bengal. So there are different stages of different Sufi orders coming to Bengal. So though the Sufi orders that were very prominent are the Chishtis, Suhrawardis, the Qadris, and later on the Naqshbandis also. So that is why looking from the Sufi perspective, we do find different Sufi silsilas or Sufi orders in Bengal.
How do you perceive the process of localization of Islam in Bengal?
Yeah, this is a very heavy question and big questions that has also been hotly debated, discussed, and contested by historians, beginning with Asim Roy, Inamul Haq, Richard Eaton, and followed by Tony K. Stewarts and others. So many people look at Islam in the specific Bengali context as a particular form of the Islamic religiosity, which is different from religiosity in the larger Islamic world. Okay, but there are scholars who say that we cannot localize Islam because since Islam claims to be a universalist religion or universal religious traditions. So the fundamentals of Islam, which are known as farais or wajibat, we call it them fundamentals of Islam. So they are followed in each and every part of the world, and even Arabic as a language of prayer is also has been adopted in different part of the world. So that is why, coming from that tradition, that Muslims have some certain fundamental beliefs which are common and found in all parts of the world. So from that perspective, if we look at Islam, so Islam is not localized. Okay, so rather we will have to focus on the connection or relations of different areas or regions with the Islamic traditions. Yes, of course, that relation happens at different historical stages. Okay, so many of the prominent Muslim scholars or Sufis, they claim that the religiosity or spirituality that or piety that they are preaching or propagating, all of them have their roots in the larger Islamic tradition. But looking at it from a historical or sociological perspectives, and or also from the perspective that religion also undergoes change at different historical stages. So if we look at sociology of religion or historicity of religion, we can also think about local variations, local manifestations or local expressions of religiosity. From that perspective, yes, of course, Islam can be, or Islamic tradition can be localized. What is at the core of this debate or contestations among the historians is certain features of Muslim religiosity in the Bengal context. One is the use of Bengali language. Okay. Another one is appropriations of certain mystical, theological or metaphysical themes into this Sufi theology. Okay. And another one is also the relations of these Sufi orders with the masses, with the public. Okay. So the attitudes of the Sufis towards people coming from different religious tradition, from different caste communities, or from different groups of piety. So looking at the Sufi institution, Sufi shrine or dargah in the Bengal context, we do see that the mystic expressions of Islamic religiosity in the Bengal context, yes, of course, provide a context for those scholars who claim that Islam in the local Bengali context is different from the Islam in the larger context, or from high Islam or traditional Islam or religious Islam. Okay, so that is why now scholars, and this debate also is because from the 18th century onwards, we do see the emergence of various reformist voices or trends within the Islamic tradition.
Sir, please elaborate on this.
Yeah. So, because in this reformist traditions, so now, which to some extent, even scholars have also highlighted whether it was also influenced by the Western ideas about religion, spirituality, or religious tradition or not. But from the 18th century onwards, we do see that there is a conscious efforts or attempt on the parts of certain Muslim scholars to define what is pure Islam, what is original Islam, or what is authentic Islam. So that is why now in the religious discourse we do see a divide between orthodoxy and heterodoxy. So this debate has led to the identifications of certain manifestations of religiosity with original Islams and the identification of certain other manifestation of religiosity with non-Islam or non-Islamic practices. So in that context now, the major theme that came to be debated is one is saint veneration, or sometimes people call it also saint worship, but the Sufis say that it is aqidat. Aqidat sometimes is translated as devotions or strong emotional attachment with the Sufi saint, dead or alive. Whether it is dead or whether he is alive does not matter, but a particular person has to establish a strong emotional attachment with the Sufi masters. So the master-disciple relationship on the one hand came to be criticized by some reformist group. On the other hand, there is another theme or another practice which is known as the practice of Kawwali. So from the very beginning, this practice has been debated or contested. But I have also written something about this on this theme, and I have also traced that even from the earliest time till the 20th century in the South Indian context also, so Muslim scholars have problems in totally rejecting this practice. But in the reformist discourse, this practice has been criticized because of another element, and that is known as ecstasy, or they use the word ghalba or wajd. So wajd, which is commonly translated as ecstasy, in which context the person loses his consciousness or will feel control over his bodily parts or on his actions. So in that context, many of the Sufis, many of the scholars, reformist scholars, criticize that this what is required in the Islamic tradition or religiosity is a conscious understanding or gnosis of the divine or God. So once a person becomes unconscious, that means so he is no longer answerable or accountable to Sharia. So unconsciousness leads a person away from the Sharia. So that is why, and along with that one, the reformists in their views, and they have also visualized various practices or quote unquote evils associated with this practice, and that is why they reject it. Even the reformist scholars, many of the reformist scholars find it very difficult to reject this practice from two perspectives. One is that this practice also has some justifications in the prophetic tradition. Okay, or many Sufis also liken this Qawwali, which in their words are known as Sama, to Zikr. And Zikr is what has been recommended in various verses of the Quran. So once the Sufi take Qawwali as a form of Sama or Zikr, and on the other hand, in the prophetic traditions also there are certain instances or cases in which music was played out in the presence of Prophet Muhammad, and he did not reject it outrightly. So that is why even for the reformist scholars, it is very difficult to reject. And that is why in the Islamic traditions there are various schools of law like the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi and Hanbali. So this practice is also very much debated, and that is why many of the leaders of this Islamic juristic schools, so they have permitted playing of music at certain occasions, like during the solemnizations of the marriage or in war time to announce the march of the army, or at during the month of Ramzan playing the drum to announce the sunset or sunrise. So these kinds of music has a purpose, and that is why they have been allowed in the Islamic tradition. So the Sufi claim that the Qawwali or the Sama that they participate in also serve a purpose, and that purpose is that they bring the listeners, in that case the initiates or the Sufis, closer to God, because sweet or melodious sounds does appeal to the heart, towards which inclines towards always the heart, and they say that it is natural, and natural is something that cannot be rejected. So they have experiences, in their words they have experimented with it, and some of the Sufis have found that yes, of course, sweet or melodious sounds does have that impact on the human soul. And the Sufis also believe that the soul is always on a journey towards the beloved, or towards, in this case, towards God. So for this spiritual journey, or to accentuate or to support or to substantiate that journey towards God, so the Sufis have appropriated music as a practice, And so far as your question is concerned about how this reformist discourse, the reformists, they say that saho, which is awakeness or awareness, is necessary to be able to perform religious duties. intoxication, which is sukr in the Sufi terms, no, intoxication is not recommended or privileged. So that is why they say that in this context, or in this time, in their time, which is from 18th century onwards, so sukr or intoxications is harmful for a believer, and that is why they should always think or look for awareness. They should be aware of what they are or who they are. So that is why they criticize this practice. And many times they also have criticized these practices because they said that these are part of the folk local traditions, which leads people away from their religious duties. So that is why they prohibited it. So in that context, both the venerations of the Sufi master as well as listening to Sufi music, in this context Qawwali or Sama, has been criticized by the reformist scholars.
What was the role of the Sufis in in propagation of Sufi thoughts and localizing localizing the Islam? What was their contribution?
Yeah, this aspect has also been discussed in greater details by various scholars. So far as the diffusion or disseminations of the Islamic tradition is concerned, so yes, of course, the Sufis, for their simple way of life, for their tolerant attitudes towards the people of different religious communities, caste and creed, or social or cultural backgrounds, and as well as the establishments of the khanqahs in various areas, where people could stay, travelers could also stay. So this one aspect of the khanqah life, yes, of course, attracted people toward the Sufis, and in that interactions, the visitors many times learns many things, many Sufi mystical or spiritual ideas from the Sufis. But another one is also that the Sufis, many often, wherever they travel, they try to communicate in the local vernacular language. Okay, so this was also helpful for them to disseminate ideas, Sufi mystical ideas, in their words, Islamic tradition also, because for the Sufis, their ideas are not different from the quote-unquote mainstream Islamic traditions. So, and rather they emphasize that what they preach, or the spiritual and mystical dimension of Islam, is the core. Okay, or the ruh, they use the word ruh, soul and life of Islamic tradition. So far as the outer external adherence to the Islamic tradition is not the core. So that is why many times they say that Sufism is nothing but the realizations of the core Islamic teaching, and that is Tawheed, or oneness of God. Okay, and this realization, they say that can be achieved by traversing the path of love. Okay, so in that context, once these ideas or these Sufi ideas were communicated to the people in the vernacular languages, it also helped in bringing the Islamic tradition to different locale. Either you use the word localization of the tradition, in which you will have to also enter into a debate with scholarly works on whether Islam can be described as a different locals, or there is only one Islam. But if we use the word term, the Islam was introduced in different locales at different places, because these scholars or Sufis or mystics who went to those locales, they adopted the language, vernacular language of the traditions. So it was also one way of introducing it. But if you read Richard Maxwell Eaton's book, The Rise of Islam in the Bengal Frontier, or Tony K. Stewart's article about translation, so there was also various ways of this introducing the Islamic tradition in these locales. And one was the translation and identification process, that Islamic metaphysical ideas were first translated into idioms, tropos, or literary genres which were known in that particular locale. So like translating Allah as Niranjan was also one of the process of translating Islamic ideas into the local language. So translation also played a significant role. And there is Richard Eaton has also written in greater detail about this identification, that various Islamic symbols or ideas, concept or beliefs were presented or interpreted with reference to certain existing symbols. So like Fatima, a pious lady, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, now can become synonymous with a female figure which is prominent in the non-Islamic religious tradition or in the traditions of that locale. So this will be an identification. Okay, and the concept of avatar and the concept of Rasul. So these kinds of identifications also help in the Bengal context, and if we refer to the research of Richard Maxwell Eaton. But in that process, many times, according to Asim Roy also, even if through this process of translation, identifications, mystics were the mediator of introducing Islam to the Bengali tradition, but through the same process, they were also mediator of introducing Bengal to Islam. Okay, so there is a debate, there is no one opinion about how Islam became localized or how Islam was introduced to different locales or different places. So there is various factors that played a significant role. Yes, of course, one of them is the cultural interactions, exchanges between the representative of the Islamic traditions and the local population. Okay, so there was exchange, there were interactions, and through that process certain areas or certain parts came to be Islamized, quote unquote, or Islam was introduced to that part.
So Qawwali, as we all know, Qawwali is a form of Sufi devotional music, and it is practiced in South Asia. How do you perceive Bangla Qawwali, the Bengali Qawwali tradition? Do you think, do you see it as a imitation and like continuation of North Indian tradition, or a like folk version or localized version of the Sufi music?
Yes, Qawwali is also, as I told you, that one form of sama in which songs are accompanied by music or musical instrument. Okay, so in this in the practice of sama, the Sufis say that some of the Sufis, according to their natural inclinations, who are given to the pleasure of sound or the pleasure of beauty, so for those initiates, Qawwali is a helpful medium to gather their thought, to concentrate on their beloved. Okay, but this is also a gradual process. It is a kind of a journey, but in that Qawwali context, the Sufis first start from the Sufi masters, then goes to Prophet Muhammad, and from there to Allah. So this is a kind of a hierarchical process, beginning from the master through Prophet Muhammad to Allah. So this is the theoretical part. And that is why in many Qawwali gathering or sitting, you will find the Qawwals or the lead singer beginning with some Quranic verses, then some poems in praise of Prophet Muhammad, and then Mankabat, which is praise of Prophet Muhammad is known as Naat, and then Mankabat of the Sufi master. Okay, so that depicts that, reflect that theoretical aspect of Qawwali. But many of the scholars have also focused on the performance side of Qawwali, in which the social background of the Qawwal, the use of many musical instrument, and patronage of the singers. Okay, so there are two ways of looking at Bengali Qawwali, and I should also confess in the very beginning that I have not yet read or listened to many Bengali Qawwalis. I have just listened to some of them. So looking at them, we do see that Bengali Qawwali maintains its connections with the North Indian or larger Islamic mystical music and song. In that the theme, which in their terms are mazmoon, so love of God, praise of Prophet Muhammad, and then praise of the Sufi masters. These are the common threads that link Bengali Qawwali to the larger mystical world, which is beyond Bengal, North India, or the Perso-Arabic world. Okay, but so far as the specificity of the Bengali Qawwali is concerned, so the language, of course, here is different. It is one vernacular local language. Another one is in terms of the musical instrument. Okay, so yes, harmonium is here in North India, but the dhol is not there. There is tabla and there is sarangi. So in terms of musical instrument, although to some extent Bengali Qawwali is different from North Indian Qawwali. Okay, and another thing that in the North Indian context, if the Qawwali is in a Persian or Arabic, so we do have less references to love themes or love imageries of South Asia. Okay, but in the Bengali context, there are in the Qawwalis many times we do have references to the South Asian imageries or symbols of love, like Radha, Krishna. These kinds of themes are there in the Bengali Qawwali. Okay, so if we look at the themes, so also with reference to themes, Bengali Qawwali to some extent is different from the North Indian or the Perso-Islamic world. So it is very hard to say or to demarcate or distinguish the Bengali tradition of Qawwali in Bengal or Bangladesh as from that which is found in the North Indian context. So there are ways of looking at it. So if you look at from the perspective of the themes or central themes, so there are much similarities. But if you look at from the language, from the perspective of language, instrument, and symbols and imageries of love and lover and beloved, so we can also say that to some extent Bengali Qawwali differs from the North Indian Qawwali tradition.
Lastly, sir, would you please tell us about the concept of love between the master and disciple?
Yeah. Yes, love is the central themes of Sufi, both idea and Sufi practice, because many of the Sufi practices also centered around the theme of love, that is the love relationship between a lover and the beloved. But in Sufism, each and every person must cultivate divine love, and that is each human being must have a love relationship with God. Okay, sorry, But as I told you earlier, that even in Sufism also this relationship is hierarchical. Hierarchical is a gradual progression, that is starting from the master, going to Prophet Muhammad, and then ending with God. So they use three phrases. One is fana fi shay, that is annihilation in the Sufi master. Then fana fir Rasul, that is annihilation in the Prophet. And then from there fana fillah, annihilation in God. Okay, but it is very difficult for the Sufis also, and for those who criticize the Sufis, to define this concept of love. Okay, so the Sufis says that love is very difficult to define because it is a mystical experience, and experience cannot be defined in words. It is something to be felt. Okay, but still they have to define it, and that they have defined it in various ways. Some say that this relationship is sorry, a compliance with the commands of God. So if a person abides by or follows the commandments of God religiously, that is that he has a relationship. Another one say that no, there are various mystical stages. Now, a person have to go through those stages up to a level where they can define it. Or the Sufis, they also define love as the attachment of the heart with the beloved in such a way that the heart forget everything except the beloved. Okay, so in that context, and that is what they many times define as love, or sometimes as ishq. If that inclination towards the beloved is intense, they say that is ishq. Ishq is many times defined as intense love. Okay, so to cultivate that love relationship, the lover has to learn obedience, allegiance, faithfulness. But in this human world, he cannot show these things. So that is why the Sufis have prescribed that disciples has to learn these things by establishing a relationship with a master. So if the master orders him something, he had to obey them. No, he has to have a strong relationship with the master, and in such a way that he forget all except his master. Okay, so all those attributes of love, or the signs and of love, relationship between human being and God, can be manifested in this love relationship. Okay, so that is why the Sufis say that a disciple first have to learn these things from his relations with his masters, and since his master is also a representative of the Prophet, because the master has a shajra or lineage, spirit lineage, and reaching up to Prophet Muhammad. So through his masters, he will also have to show or express that love to the Prophet, and from there, then it will be easier for him to travel to God or to reach this stage of divine love, in where he will forget even his self and all others, and will remember only the beloved, and that is God. And that is a situation, or that is a state which is described as fana fillah, and that is annihilations in God. So in that context, love plays a very important role, and it is love for which the Sufis also have prescribed music, because music creates heat in the heart, and the heat is very necessary for love, for the arousal or cultivation of love. So in that context, we can also say that Sufi Qawwali is also linked to the idea of cultivating love, making the heart warm and hot with divine love.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving
So
me.
you are welcome, and I will appreciate it. And